Hello, hello. Welcome to the Pure Desire Podcast on YouTube. I am your host, Trevor Windsor. This is a weekly podcast helping you take back your life from the effects of unwanted sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. Sexual brokenness impacts us all, men and women who are stuck in shame and are unsure if healing is actually possible. Church leaders who want to help but don't know where to start. Parents who don't know how to help their kids develop sexual integrity. Wherever you're at, this podcast is for you. Through sharing stories of healing, interviewing addiction and betrayal experts, and normalizing the conversation on sexuality, we offer a clear plan for recovery and healing from the effects of unwanted sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. You have what it takes to break free, heal your relationships, and take back your life. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us so much and really just pushes our message forward. All right, with that, let's get to this week's episode. We made it to 300. Like 300 episodes. I don't know if, I didn't tell you this. I had a conversation last Sunday with someone in my growth group, and he was talking about like someone he knows, like, do you have any resource or anything I could give this person? And I was like, yeah, we actually have a podcast. And he goes, oh, wow, that's really cool. Like, how many episodes have you guys done? And I'm like, 300. He goes, 300? Oh my God, what? That's like, yeah, man, 300. So that's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, the number's getting high enough that like you almost, I don't know totally, but you can start to feel like maybe we should stop talking about it. Kind of like your age. As I get older, like my age is something I'm less interested in talking about because it's like, well, yeah, awesome. I've done a lot of these and I don't really want a reminder sometimes of how old I am. So that's not the same on the podcast, but I was thinking about that for this episode. Like I remember hitting 100. It was like, wow, that's a big number. And you know, I think when we started this, we had hopes for it, but we didn't know if it'd be successful or what extent it would grow or how it would help people. And that felt monumental. And yeah, that was about the 2-year mark, you know, and then 200, like, wow, we like doubled it. And now at 300, it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of become a routine for us of, yeah, this is what we do and we're going to keep doing it. And so 400 and 500 and 6, like it's just going to keep going unless, you know, God tells us to stop or the medium totally changes and no one listens anymore. But we've just continued to see basically from episode 1 to today, it's continued to grow and help people. And if we can help people by sitting in this room and talking about things that most people aren't talking about, we're here for it. So it's awesome to celebrate. It's crazy to think that that means we're coming up on 6 years worth of episodes. We were much younger, more foolish men when we started. Now we're getting old and wise, and hopefully it just keeps getting better. So yeah, pretty incredible. Thanks for speaking that over me, by the way. Much younger. And it is true. It is crazy to think about. And I did the math the other day. Because some of those earlier episodes were only like a half an hour, but if you do the math, we have 10,000 hours. We have probably around 18,000 hours of doing this, which is wild. How do you get the math on
300 episodes times 60 minutes? 18,000.
Oh, you mean minutes? Yeah.
18,000. Oh, crap.
Well, because I'm like,
crap.
Our episodes
Did
are
I
about
really
an
do
hour.
that and then divide?
I'm like, so that's like 300 hours for 300 episodes.
So 300. How do you do the math? Help me do the math. Man, I look like an idiot right now.
300
Justin,
episodes.
Shut your mouth.
Times 60 minutes. Yeah, that would be 18,000 minutes.
Divided by 60 minutes.
That would still be 300 hours.
Son of a bee.
But that's a long time.
Can you see how aspirational?
Like, let's put that in days.
Oh my God. This is why I'm not the
That's why he's not the operations director. That's like 13 days solid, though. That's kind of crazy to think about.
I hate this episode already.
For some people, it just became their favorite episode.
You know, oh my gosh. That's fine. And that makes me feel a little bit better.
It's cool to think about, too, things like in the sports world that 300 is, like batting 300.
Right.
300 wins for a pitcher is like Hall of Fame level. Like that. There's a lot of things that 300 is. That's a big number.
Yeah, and 300 hours is my least favorite part of this entire 6 years of episoding. So we do this from time to time. We've now done this. This will be the third time, and actually we did it at 260 when it was the 5-year. But really, just a reflection. We're going to look back on the last 100 episodes. And as I was looking through them, we did a lot.
Yeah.
We had a lot of conversations with a lot of people.
Yes, we did.
And so we're going to talk about the last 100 episodes, some of our favorites. We're going to talk about what's coming in the next 100. And we don't have all that stuff perfectly mapped out, but we're still going to have that conversation. And then some ministry highlights. I think that For us, it gets easy to it's just what we do. Like we have these projects we're working on, these big things that we're having conversations about, and it's easy to just assume that people know about it or that they don't need to know about it. So today we're going to talk about some of those things, some of the things we got
exciting.
Going. Yeah. Okay, so with the first part, let's just look at the past 100 episodes, so 200 to 299. Which episodes stand out to you and why?
Yeah, it is incredible to go back through 100 and realize that's, over 2 years ago to get back to the beginning, or about 2 years ago. So if I were to just walk backwards through the ones that stood out to me, I really loved the one we did not too long ago. I always like doing Mythbusters, partly because just that concept of we see a truth that many in our society believe, and we realize it's not helping or healthy, and we want to kind of go after it in a way that says, let's develop better paradigms. And so the Mythbusters on high frequency of sex equals health, or that we're sexually healthy.
Rodney and Tracy, right?
And just unpacking all the ways that we've been led to believe that more sex equals better marriages or better relationships, and that that's not always true. I just really enjoyed that one and kind of going after that myth. The next one that stood out, episode 281 with our friend Adrian Hickman. That's one of those that I feel should just be like on repeat on my playlist. And every few months go back because he's so quotable and there's so many things that he brings clarity to in ways that a lot of people can't. And so if you missed that episode, if you're going to go back and listen to one, go listen to Adrian. And super excited that he's coming to our summit this year. So I don't know if a lot of people know that, but one more reason that you should plan to come to the summit in September. Another one that stood out to me, and I would say because it was surprising how much I enjoyed it. Episode 255, we interviewed Brandon and Tonya Clark, who are from Covenant Eyes, and we're big fans of Covenant Eyes. But I didn't know much about them or their story. And was just really impacted by the clarity they had around telling their story. And I think maybe in particular, Tonya's side of really articulating from the betrayed spouse, how it was making her feel, steps she took, what her recovery had to look like. And then, they've got that lead into their great, I think it's 30 days or their,
it was 14
their
days.
free resource, 14
vows.
days.
Yeah, restored vows.
Their free resource. I just highly recommend that and them because they've got, I think, a very winsome story that is relatable. Thought of episode 243 with our friend Craig Cashwell and the topic of spiritual bypass that I think we unpacked for an hour, but for many of us that grew up in the church is maybe a lifetime of unlearning how we use spiritual language to oftentimes avoid doing the hard work of healing and facing our trauma, and that we've applied some biblical ideas in unhealthy ways to avoid and ignore rather than allow God to bring healing. So that was a powerful conversation. Just a couple more. Have to do a shout out to episode 226 because for the one and maybe the only time my wife was in the studio, and with her being a full-time teacher, it was a challenge for us to figure out when to get her in. We got her during a summer month, and just so fun to have her enter into my world. I mean, we've told our story many other places, but to get to do that on the Pure Desire podcast, that was a lot of fun. And she walks into a room and the energy changes, both for her and for me. So that was fun. Just two more, episode 208 with Rosie McKinney.
Oh, yeah.
One, because of the accent. Just,
oh, my gosh. She's amazing to listen to.
Could listen to her talk all day, but really her content of speaking on behalf of betrayed spouses and the work that they can do to recover and the way she can speak to men and say, maybe it's because of the accent. I think she can say to men in a pretty direct way, like, listen, pal, you need to do some work to help your wife, because if you don't and she's angry, there's a reason. So just loved kind of the way she's forthright, but in a way that makes you want to lean in and do the hard work. And then going back to the very start of the 200s, episode 201 was the first time I believe we had Sheila Ray Gregoire on and got to talk about the Great Sex Rescue, which is still in my mind, like if you grew up in the church, if you grew up in purity culture and you've really grown up with kind of a male-dominated perspective that men have needs sexually and women have responsibilities to meet those needs, and even the shades of that have some truth, but the way it has led into so much unhealth, I think Sheila Ray Gregoire is the voice that's really challenging that paradigm. And she'll poke you, she'll prod you, she'll maybe say some things you don't agree with, or her approach, you'd say, well, that seems a little harsh or unfair. But I think when we're changing a paradigm that is as instilled as the one we're talking about, that's the kind of voice you need, who's not just going to soft pedal around and go, oh, well, no, she's like, this is stupid. This is hurting people. This is unbiblical. And she's got a lot of humor and fun. And so that introduction to Sheila Ray, and maybe it's because of how that book helped me, even, 8-9 years into recovery and in a very healthy marriage, to still see, wow, there are echoes of my upbringing that I've never really thought through, that I'm perpetuating or that I'm stuck in. And so I don't say this lightly when I say if that's your background too and you haven't read that book, you need to.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you need the whole book, but I know there will be pieces you go, oh, I've never thought of it from that angle. So I loved that episode for all those reasons.
Yeah. You took a few of mine, but I will say we had, I think it was 204, 222, and 251 we had Sheila on. And so in 100 episodes, we had her on 3 times, which was awesome.
The first one, 251 was with Keith, with her husband?
Yeah. So we did the first one we did with her was the Great Sex Rescue, and then the second one was rescuing marriages from porn, and then the third one was with her husband. And then she wrote the Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex, and then her and Keith, her husband, wrote the Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex. Those two going together. And yeah, I agree. She just she pulls no punches. She is willing to just say it how it is. And what I love about her is it's not just her opinion. It's a lot of research that she has done as well. And so it's based on actual factual evidence that, this has caused so much damage. I also said spiritual bypass with Craig Cashwell. It's funny. This is a way I've heard just a friend recently say this to me about someone else, but I feel this way toward Craig, that just an unbelievable amount of affection toward him. I don't know how else to explain it. Like, he just seems like a kindred spirit, and was so grateful to meet him at our ITAP training for the PSAP certification, and our time with him was awesome. And then Adrian, that should be on the top of everyone's list. Let's be honest. That episode with Adrian Hickman, 281. Okay, 2 other ones I had were, and this is just a recent one, but we had Randy Alcorn, like the Randy Alcorn, come in, sit where I'm sitting right this second, and he talked to us about moral failings in the church, and 297 was that episode. And I just loved, I love Randy. I've gotten to know him a little bit personally we actually go to the same church, so I've gotten some connection there, but admire him as a writer and a thinker, but really just appreciate his perspective on, I think, one of the biggest issues right now in the church is the moral failure of leadership. So yeah, that was a good one.
And probably the first time we had I think a lot of these guests in their realm are big names, but the first time they were in the studio with 100%, us, and not just on a screen.
And that amplified it.
So that was fun. Even thinking through, man, if someone was open to it, maybe more often we should take the time to say, if you're open to flying in, we'll fly you in.
Yeah.
Because of not only, having Randy in the episode, but, him being around our office just a little bit and saying hi to people. And it's like, man, this is cool, that connection. Yeah. So, I love that he actually was in the room with us.
Well, and if just thinking about that too, people who I've really valued, we had Nancy Piercy, the episode before that, 296, who wrote the book Love Thy Body, which was world altering for me. And so that one was great. But then I think, honestly, my favorite is the series we did on the Pure Desire Foundations, 287 to 290. That series of episodes, we really got to flesh out the foundational pieces or aspects to what we do. And we get a lot of questions about that. Are we biblical enough? What about the clinical stuff? Why is groups what we do? And then how we take that family systems approach. Those episodes, I feel like were, terrible analogy here, but really foundational of what we do. And I think that it's also an episode, those series are going to be episodes that answer a lot of questions for people moving forward. And so I'm sort of sorry that it took us so long, but I'm also glad that we finally have it out there. So those are my favorites.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, a story about that Nancy Piercy episode. I really enjoyed it as well. And when I went home that day, was just talking to my wife and the kids that were around about the episode, and my 2 teenage daughters happened to be in the room. And I was kind of sharing some of Nancy's approach, particularly about topics like transgenderism and same-sex relationships, and a fundamentally different way of approaching it versus, right and wrong or good and bad, but looking at that my body is made a certain way, and even all the way down, one of the things she talked about, like at the cellular level, male and femaleness is expressed, and that when we honor that and honor our body, we live this, full life. And it was very interesting with my teenage daughters to kind of see them turn on to that, to say, oh, that's a unique way or a different way of talking about it. Because I think in their world of high school and social media, it's just conflict. And it's like, well, you either accept people or you hate them.
Right.
And I think Nancy just kind of took that whole conversation of, do I accept someone or hate them, and turned it on its head to say, well, let's change the approach. It's more, what is my body saying, and how can I just love my body and agree with it? Yeah. And for a teenager too, I think that concept of love your body, I mean, outside of Nancy Piercy talking about it, it really connects with teenage culture, because there is kind of a lot of that self-affirmation, self-care, and the discontinuity and I could see it in my teenage daughter's brains of like, oh, if people on the one hand are saying, oh, you need to love yourself and care for yourself, but you're in a war with your own body, how is that even possible? I just saw a lot of avenues of conversation there for, the young generation to talk about, hey, let's take something that you already do value, to love yourself and love your body, and apply it to our sexuality and say, would this maybe be a better way to live? And so it's just cool to see our podcast have a practical application even for my teenage daughters.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
Well, we've had a lot of guests. We've had a lot of PD guests, and maybe you'll notice we didn't bring up as many of them, because those are people we get to talk to all the time. I think it is those who stand out because it's a one-time conversation. Yeah. But as we look at the future, the next 100 episodes, or the next 300 episodes,
the next 300 hours, to get the math
or 10,000 hours, however many, we're still doing the math on that. Do we have any hopes or dreams for the podcast moving forward in terms of guest series? What are some things on the radar for you, Trevor? And I would say to our listeners, much of the episode content is driven by Trevor. I don't know if some people know that he's kind of the brains behind where we go next, and certainly we collaborate on a lot of topics and themes, but week in and week out, the one who's kind of masterminding what ends up making it on the microphone is Mr. Trevor Windsor. So Trevor, what do you see on the radar? What are you hearing? What are you thinking about?
Yeah. Okay. So I've got a few different things, and I wrote a couple of them down. One is we've had kind of a yearly rhythm of doing episodes where Ashley Jameson and Heather Kolb do a women's takeover. And so
women's takeover.
Yep. We're recording those here shortly. And so they'll have a string of 4 episodes. And I would just say, even off of that, there is an idea that we've had, and we've even sent out surveys to listeners about this, that potentially going down the road of having a seasonal podcast specifically with Ashley and Heather, meaning like it's not just going to come every fall per se, but I just mean, instead of an episodic every single week podcast, that it'd be something that we would record one season and release it over 10 to 15 weeks or something like that, where they could really hone in on specific topics. It wouldn't even necessarily just talk from the betrayed, partner, or even just female sexuality, but could really just make it their own. And so that's kind of an idea that we've been playing around with. We're trying to figure out how to make that happen logistically, but that's one as well. And then a couple other ones, Emmanuel Garraway, who's our church relations specialist, he was on a recent episode. He was like, hey, could we do like a stories of healing, but from the church's perspective? And it's funny, as soon as he said it, I just like, boom, I had the vision, I got it. Like, you don't even need to explain anymore. Where what we're going to start doing, and I'm not 100% sure when this will happen, but for sure in the next 100 episodes, start a string of episodes where we'll have church leaders and maybe even group leaders from that church come on the show and talk about what has worked for them. What does implementing Pure Desire resources and creating their own recovery ministry inside their community, what does that look like? And really trying to like mine the ground of like, what have they done, what has worked, what hasn't, in a way to help other churches who can listen to those episodes and be like, oh yeah, we've had that same issue. Here's how they solved it. Maybe let's us try it. So that's another really cool idea that Emmanuel had. I'm really excited about that one, because that really is our heart. I mean, if you've listened to the show at all, you know that that's our heart, is to help the local church. And then if I'm just, and I didn't even tell you I was going to say this, but if I'm just like dreaming, and we've talked about this being a possibility, and it's something we do want to really do, is having, for some of our listeners, you've heard Christianity Today's The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast, which really did a deep dive and exploration of Mark Driscoll and Mars Hill Church in Seattle, and really painted a picture of what happened there. I think for us, we feel like we're uniquely gifted and uniquely educated in this area where we could look at moral failings in the church, and not even a deep dive on just one particular leader, but doing more of a journalistic, exploratory type of conversation over a season or two of podcasts where we could do a lot of research and have a lot of conversations with people who have been a part of churches where moral failing has happened, have been victims involved in that, and really find a way to produce this where it reaches so many more people and so many more churches, because this continues to happen, whether you're aware of Pure Desire or not, and really a way that we can help get the message of Pure Desire out there. So that's another big one. That would be a ton of work, but just some ideas we've been kicking around.
Yeah, and I like the way that those all connect to our values at Pure Desire.
Yeah.
You know, we want to be a ministry that continues to sound this voice to say, this is not a men's issue, this is a people problem. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, we're a little unique for a lot of recovery ministries because we don't focus one or the other. We try to say, yes, we're here to help people. But the reality is, Trevor, you and I are both dudes, and we can't change that fact, and we're the podcast hosts. Yeah. So there will tend to be more of a male perspective, even though we have great female guests on and cover that, to have a opportunity for more women's voices, for Heather and Ashley to kind of have that role. Mm-hmm. I think it's not to create a competing product in any way, but it's to emphasize we're here for all people. Mm-hmm. And I think for some women, to hear women sharing and being the hosts would be more impactful. And so I love that it connects to that value, that we're here to help couples heal, men and women. Women can struggle, men can struggle, women can be betrayed, men can be betrayed. Yep. So Ashley and Heather are respected voices, and I know people would love hearing that. And the stories of the church, that's our value, that we're here for the local church, that at the end of the day, the ultimate success is when a church is owning this problem and recovery solution for themselves. Yes. And we've just been the coach that helps them get there. And so I think for a lot of churches, they maybe have a desire, but right now they're not doing much of anything. And if you've not been doing much of anything, it can be very hard to know, how do I go from 0 to 60? And so to hear other stories tell their journey, I think would be very, very impactful. And then just looking at the culture of leadership in our country, I think that's the heart of this moral failings, is not to be like sensationalized and, well, listen to what this leader did, or have you heard this story? I mean, that's, in other areas of our world is maybe what gets clicks and views, but that's not what we're after. No. We really want to address to say, if the church is going to get better long term, and if we're going to see these stories stop happening, we need to address the culture that's creating it. We can't just think, as I brought up on a lot of podcasts, that, well, if we just get better leaders and those bad leaders that did those bad things go away, we'll be fine. It's like, no, some of what we're seeing is a byproduct of the culture we've created, where leaders at an early age aren't given permission to be real. They're not allowed to be human beings in process. There are safe areas that they can say, hey, I need help with my spending, or I need help with my marriage. And churches go, oh, we're going to support you. And we're so glad our pastor is getting healthy. But for the average pastor, if they raise their hand and say, I've got sexual issues, I've got porn issues, I've got temptations and desires I don't know what to do with. They feel like, I raise that hand and ask for help. The church says, oh, go away. You must not be fit for ministry. And I get that we've got to have qualifications for ministry, but I just think what we're speaking to is a culture that pastors and leaders aren't allowed to be real. And by the time the stories come out, it's been 20, 30 years in the making. And I'm not in any way excusing, justifying, or rationalizing what they end up doing, because the stories that we all hear are horrible and they're heartbreaking and it's sad. It's like, why did that have to happen? And we get so focused on the moment of exposure maybe that we miss the 25-year journey that led to it. And we want to ask the question, what could we do as a church culture to change that trajectory at the beginning? And that would be really the point of that. So it's on our radar. When we get there, we haven't committed, to a date or time, but I think we're both moving in that direction. The couple other things that I would just add is to say, we're going to keep having guests. We're going to keep having people that hit our radar and we go, man, that's a voice we want to hear from. And we know for some of you, you don't love every voice we pick because you have issues with this aspect of their theology, or that way they say something, or a tweet you saw that they expressed this view. You're like, they were on the Pure Desire podcast. I can't believe that. And I just want to remind everyone, like, we don't bring someone on because we agree with them 100%. And if that was the case, we'd have like nobody on. I mean, Trevor and I wouldn't be on together because we don't agree on everything 100%.
Yeah.
But it's because we see a dynamic they bring or an aspect to a situation. We're like, man, that's something we need to wrestle with. And so I hope, listener, that you'll give us grace for those guests that may not be your favorite, because there are some that you're like, oh, I loved that guest. And keep in mind that for other people, the guest you loved was the one that bothered them, or there was an aspect of their theology. Right. So we're just trying to approach this with kind of open hands to say, hey, if I've said it in a lot of churches, if you can agree with the Apostles' Creed, we think we can find resonance, because at the end of the day, we want the majors to be the majors. And if we disagree on some of the minor points, we'll let that sort itself out later. The other thing I feel like we've committed to is recognizing, for many of you, the point at which you start listening to this podcast is the point of your pain, the point of your crisis. You're looking for hope. You're looking for community. And someone says, well, have you heard the Pure Desire podcast? And so to continue to produce episodes that really land in early recovery, what do I do if I found pornography on my spouse's phone? What do I do if I'm stuck in the binge purge cycle of looking at pornography and acting out with masturbation? Because I know for many, those are the questions you're asking when you first listen to the podcast. And you can search them and find it from 3 years ago, but we want to keep doing fresh content in that area, so that when people tune in, or when you have a friend going through crisis, you're like, oh, Pure Desire just did a podcast that I think would be perfect for you. And we know that that's a lot of the ways this podcast grows, is because you, our listener, are saying to a friend, a family member, a church member, like, I just heard this on the Pure Desire podcast. Go and listen to this episode. So I think making sure that we have content that lands in that early recovery is something we're committed to. Yeah,
absolutely. I am excited about the new guests that we're going to have on. And it's funny, I took kind of like a survey, and I was talking to my wife about this. Like, we've gotten to talk to Josh McDowell. We've gotten to talk to Stephanie Carnes. We've gotten to talk to Randy Alcorn, Nancy Piercy, Preston Sprinkle. Like, these are people that, like, I've known about, because I grew up in the church for a while now. And it's like, wait, what? Like, we had conversations with them. We got to talk to them. Like, they liked our stuff. Or
it's helpful to remember that, because we've had other big names that I won't say that have never replied to us, or we heard no,
That's
or
true.
we heard later, and it's been 4 years, and when we're still hearing later. So it's good to be reminded that there were others that said yes.
Pray for Nick. Pray for Nick and the bitterness that's still there. No, for sure. And I mean, like, we'll continue to have.
Am I not good enough? It's that old trauma voice.
No, we'll have those conversations, and we'll continue to have those people we feel like can really help further the conversation. And one of the reflections I've just had, and I've heard this recently too from people about the show, is just how conversational and natural it is that we talk about this stuff. Like, it's just, for us, it's second nature. It's what we do for our job. But that's what's so helpful, is that there's just an avenue or a channel that talks about this stuff as normal as it is, or as it should be. And so we're going to continue to find people that help in that conversation, whether we agree with everything or not, for sure. So okay, so every 100 episodes, and what's cool too, you've done this at past Pure Desire Summit events, where you have like a sit down with the executive director, and you kind of give like a vision for the year to come. But over the last 100 episodes, so we're talking over almost a couple of years. What are some recent big projects that we've had, recent highlights that we want to remind people of? And then what are some of the things that are coming in the future for Pure Desire as a ministry, looking ahead to the next couple of years?
Yeah. So when will people be listening to this live time? Is this like
April.
Late March?
No, it's April.
April.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I want to ground it, like, not talk about something that's still coming for us, but by the time this is out.
Spoiler alert, we pre-record these.
No, honestly, between when we're recording and this one coming out, I don't think there'll be a big project released. One thing that will have happened, myself and another of our speaking team member, Rodney Wright, are traveling to Poland, or will have been in Poland. To help a group there launch a Pure Desire ministry in Poland. And that trip was made possible by a donor who's covered the whole amount. And so we're able to go to them just as a gift and say, we want to help connect with churches and leaders and talk about why Pure Desire is different and how it can help your church. And so along those lines, I would just ask people to pray for the international reach of Pure Desire, because we do hear so frequently that, the resources are limited to the United States. You get into another language and the resources might literally be zero. There may be nothing in their language. Yeah. And we're trying to figure out how to catalyze that in other languages, but quite frankly, we don't have a great paradigm. we don't have the people resources on our team to make that happen in languages that, I mean, maybe outside of Spanish, there's some stuff we're working on in Spanish, but outside of that, like we don't know how to make that happen. And we're not like, Josh McDowell has books in hundreds of languages now. And that's largely because of connections with a publisher and international publishing. And that's not really how Pure Desire publishes our books. And so we don't have a consistent rhythm of getting into those languages. And we're just asking God to help us because we really believe that's what needs to happen, but it's still a slow process. So pray for Poland because it's a new country that we're opening the doors in, but pray for all the other countries that God would lead us into that. The big projects that have happened, you think of the last 2 years, having the group leader training as a streaming tool on our website that can equip group leaders all over the country and all over the world to lead effective groups. Is
less than a year ago now.
So good to have out there. And having reworked Betrayal and Beyond to be more partner sensitive, to be at a place that is more aligned with what a spouse needs to hear in that first 9 months to a year and not trying to cover the whole 2 to 5 year process in one workbook. I think that's a significant step forward. So those are the big things that come to mind. But where we're headed, we are really excited to have a second workbook for men as a follow-up to the 7 pillars that'll be coming out soon. And we don't have a release date, but I would say with a high degree of confidence that for men that have been through 7 pillars, by the fall, you could use a second workbook called The Compassionate Warrior to take men through. It would not be a starting point, so you would still use 7 pillars for that. It would be the next workbook after that to take men to another level of healing. And I'll say on the women's side, there will be because of what we've done with Betrayal and Beyond, making it really more, let's help you through the initial crisis and trauma. There will be a follow-up to that coming, although that won't be this year. So that's more of a future project. Other things that are coming down the road very soon, if you've listened to the podcast or been around Pure Desire the last year or so, you know that we're partnering with a motion film coming out called Undefiled. And then our role is to be the follow-up video resource. And so we think by the summer that film will come out. So our video resource is tied to the film. And the film, as some people may know, is tied to distribution and rights. And there's some of those things still being sorted out that Pure Desire is not involved in at all. But when the film comes out, we'll have this video series that is really, it's even an introduction to our introductions. Like it would be a step before using Sexual Integrity 101 or the Conquer series, just to show people this film and then say, hey, we've got a follow-up 8-week study that if you want to understand more of the themes of the film, of pornography and living life by performance and finding your identity and success and how all this could lead people into sex trafficking and what we do about that. It's just, I think, an intriguing starting point, and we're looking forward to that coming out sometime soon. Then other projects on the radar. Unraveled is our women's resource for those that have sexuality issues, pornography issues, love addiction, anything on the female spectrum of sexuality. We want to put out a version of that is for college-age single women or just young adult women who are single, like we have Living Free for Men. It would be an equivalent of that for young women. So I think that would be a great resource. And then we're gearing up, and we don't have a timeline on it, but we recognize the need for youth resources and curriculum that isn't just for those who have already identified a struggle and are willing to work on it, which is what I've said about our workbooks, Top Gun and Behind the Mask. They're great if someone knows they have a problem and is willing to do work on it, which from the average teenagers I know does not describe very many teenagers. Either they don't think it's that big of a deal, or even if they do, they don't want to do weekly homework because they already have classes and homework, and it just kind of lands in that category. So it's shaping some teen material that we feel could be broadly used by a whole youth group, and could have some uniqueness for boys, for girls, for men, for women, but would really be a tool to give youth pastors and youth leaders to say, just take all your kids through this, because they are growing up in a pornified world with sexual content at their fingertips on their social media, that where they're living life, porn is always a click away. And the nature of what they're facing, what it's doing to their brains is so different than even 15, 20 years ago. And so we want to take a lot of the principles that we know makes Pure Desire effective and translate them to that youth audience at a way that's proactive to just say, how do I navigate life?
Yeah.
How do I learn to have resilience to porn? How do I develop authentic relationships where this isn't a hidden thing? It's something I can talk about, and not just talk about, because I do think porn culture for our teens is kind of normalized pornography, that they probably talk about it, but don't know what to do about it. There's maybe not the conviction of, I've got to change right now. There's like, well, yeah, doesn't everybody have this come up?
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, but let's talk about what we do that keeps us healthy, keeps us free. So that is a big project that we're working towards, and it's kind of the timing of some of these other projects that will dictate when can we get to this one. So those are things that I'm excited about. We have some other really big projects that I'm in the middle of working through that we can't talk about yet.
Yeah.
But what I would say our focus is, we feel really confident that we have solutions that can help the church. What we don't feel confident on is how to help churches become aware of those and have a pathway into them. And so we've got some really big projects with outside groups that could create new open doors that right now we don't have. And so please pray for that. And when I can give specifics, I will. Yeah. But just to say, we're in the middle of some pretty big conversations right now. That's super exciting.
Yeah. I think the only other thing that I would just mention is that we're also prayerfully considering a building for Pure Desire. I mean, trying to find a place where we can have, right now we're at least in a place that we're just starting to run up against capacity. And a lot of our donors and people who've been with us over this last year know that that's a push that we're starting to make, but just prayer that the Lord would lead us to a location, a building, some land, something like that to really help us, because we're trying to build, the hope would be a forever home, but at least somewhere that we have room to grow in, and we'd be there for an extended period of time. But yeah, I would echo the big projects. I've gotten to be a part of some of those meetings, and there's some really exciting possibilities. But definitely one of them is the future location of Pure Desire, where we're going to be. So prayers for that for sure.
Yeah, and that's been a double bind with the building that we run into, because we do, we want to stop paying a landlord resources and invest in our future and in the ministry, and have a space that could accommodate, small conferences, training opportunities. We know the world is more virtual, but that there's still a tremendous value in being in the room with people. And so, for couples graduating from their year of counseling, for couples that want to be trained to kind of take Pure Desire to their part of the world, to being able to bring them in for a few days and have a place to do it, it would be incredible. Having enough office space for the staff that will be in office. Yeah. And as we do virtual things, I mean, if anyone ever has visited the Pure Desire offices, they know that we're basically in an office space running this whole podcast and any recordings we do. And it's like, hey, what if we actually had a room that was made to be a studio,
right?
That had space for it and soundproofing for it, and wasn't, not all of our listeners probably know that right behind the wall, like 3 feet behind Trevor, is a car company that must schedule people to come in and look to buy cars. And when they do, they often rev the engines. There have been podcasts we've had to stop and just pause till the engine is done revving and they're showing off its
horsepower.
Literally
the wall shakes sometimes.
It's like, wow.
It's like,
I hope they buy that car and get it out of that room so that we can go back to our ministry. So all of that, those are reasons we're looking at, hey, we want a space that we can call our own.
Yeah.
But when you think of it being our forever home, or at least long term, that starts to get to some size and square footage it's expensive. And real estate right now is not cheap, and buildings are not cheap. And so I tell people, and they're like, what kind of building do you want? I'm like, I want the building that God has for us. And I think he has something, and we don't know what it looks like or how big it is, but I think if we only look at, well, here's what we can afford. The truth is, what we can reasonably afford and think that, with some donor help we could get into, probably wouldn't fit for very long, because if God continues to use Pure Desire and we grow, like, we fill it up, and we don't want to go somewhere that in 3 years, like, well, glad we bought this building, now we need to sell it and find something else. We really want a place that we could be for decades, but the price tag on that is really prohibitive. So we're praying that God would lead us. I'm not immune to having a big faith goal, but I don't want to just throw a number out there or a size because we come up with it. So that's where we're just asking God to lead us. And I think whatever that is, our time frame is probably in about 2 years would be the goal, to be in that new location. So we do have some time, but you can't wait till the month before and then find it, especially if we decide to build something, because that's a long, long process.
Totally.
So if that's what God has for us, really this year, we'd probably need to find where's that property, what's the building look like. Yeah. So we're feeling that, like I said, double bind. And as people know, double binds can be paralyzing. And I think we don't feel paralyzed. I'd say we feel like we're just in a season of discernment and of waiting on God for some of that clarity. That can be hard for donors or others who want specifics. But I think for this season, it's just where we are, because we don't want to get into something that's going to prohibit ministry because we've invested too much in a physical location. And I think we've all seen churches that happens as they build the big, beautiful building, but then they can't pay their staff and they're laying people off and it doesn't pan out the way they expected. I mean, that's the last thing we want is to be, doing ministry to try to afford a building. So just a little insight in the kind of stuff we're thinking through, but it's exciting to believe that God has a future for Pure Desire, and we need to think big because we know the problem is big. Yeah. And that's why we're motivated that way is we want to just keep growing to help more people. And we think a location could be part of that.
And I would just say another huge blessing we've been able to experience, and we know that it's the Lord growing our ministry, is staff growth. I mean, that's part of the reason why we're looking for a building as well is the groups team has added 2 new people. My department, marketing communications, has added 2 new people. We're hiring new clinicians. Like, it's just, we are growing, and it's awesome to see the Lord bless that. But also that creates,
problems,
capacity issues, right?
Yeah.
So, and
we just had an organizational meeting that I called this week because we've got one. We don't have hardly any storage in this building, but we have an area that became a de facto kind of junk drawer. It's like, okay, if this keeps growing, we're all going to regret it. So let's come up with a plan. But the challenge, the plan is, well, where can it go? There's nowhere to put it.
Whose office is this going in, basically?
What corner can this get shoved in? So that's kind of where we're at. And it's a good problem to have because it means, well, we need this space for a desk. Sure. We need this space for staff.
It's exciting.
And,
it is.
We like those problems.
Yeah, we're excited about what the Lord's going to do for sure. And I know that people know that you started this episode, but I'll conclude it. I'll take over here. But it has been genuinely, and people continue to ask me this question, what are things you're working on? Like, what's stuff that you're passionate about that you get to do for work? And it continues to be the podcast. Like, I continually say this is my favorite thing that I get to do. And a lot of it is, because, it's a way to be, you mentioned coming up with the topics and ideas and writing the questions. Like, that's super fun for me to craft. It's almost like I get to direct, or produce, because, and I'm pretty sure in like a fantasy world, or if we were in the multiverse, there'd be another version of me that's directing movies or something. But that has been super fun. But I just love being able to have these conversations and to meet really interesting, cool people that have a lot of stuff to help us and benefit us. And I know I'll speak for me on this. Like, I gain a lot from the podcast. I think that if you were to look at my development, even understanding of this topic in this area, a lot of it can be tied to the conversations we've had. So
it's kind of like when you preach regularly. If you're doing it right, you're preaching to yourself first. Yeah. And I think when we do the podcast, I would share that we get to put these out in the world to help people, but we have the conversations first, and it's like when I brought up Sheila Ray Gregoire's, I learned from her first. It wasn't just that she was a great guest. It's that, man, that spoke to me. And so I echo, this is a big part of our growth because we're hearing new ideas. We're asking people their opinion, and it just forms us. And so if you, listener, feel like it's formed you, know that we're in that together. We're all being formed by this process, these guests, and these conversations.
Yeah. So here's to another 300, and here's to finally getting to 10,000 hours when we get to the 10,000th episode.
May what a good story. That would be a long time from
If you're watching this, you can see how red my cheeks are of embarrassment. But either way, Nick, I love getting to do this with you, and thanks for being with me for, this is a lot of episodes. Appreciate it.
Love you too. It's a good time.
Yeah. And wherever you're at on your journey, Pure Desire is here to help you take back your life from unwanted sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. If you or someone you know needs recovery and healing, go to puredesire.org and begin the journey today. If you like this episode or are a fan of the podcast, please share it with others. Make sure you check out the full episode up on YouTube as well. You will see we have a new sign in the studio that says,
Never stop being healthy.